You are listening to the Innumerable cast.
Is your relationship with your climbing shoes starting to feel like just a series of Netflix nights with carry-out? Is the spark gone? Are the dreamy days of wistfully wondering if your shoes miss you when you can't be romping in the hills together faded away? Well, let the Sportiva theory put some big bang back in your life. Extreme sensitivity combined with high dynamism allows the theory to have unprecedented pedidexterity and reactivity on holds. Pedidexterity, dynamism, reactivity. Isn't that just what you've been secretly longing for? Do you really want to spend your sun-drenched days and climbing gym nights with a board last and confining laces? Or with an aggressive and ultra-sensitive slipper that lets you really feel those holds you so lovingly caress every chance you get? Look, you and your old shoes can still be friends. Even meet up once in a while for a 5'9" audible air or two. But the Sportiva theory is going to fulfill your needs in a way that those old shoes just never could. So if you've lost that loving feeling, then reignite the passion with the Theory climbing shoe from Sportiva. Go to Sportiva.com or your favorite local shop to test the theory. Look, folks, I know you're saving up for that getaway to Spain, but your friends and family are going to think you're a total loser if you don't come up with at least a few gifts for the holidays. Hey! Enough with the sleigh bells. This year, maximize your gift-giving and holiday spending by supporting small businesses banging it out in the trenches. Entering Innumerable at checkout gets you discounts at bonfirecoffee.com and peterwgilroy.com. And entering Innumerable gets you a deal at belayspecs.com. And what's more, you'll be helping out a business so small, it's just a 5'6", 140-pound guy sitting at his desk in his living room who may or may not be wearing pants. So happy holidays. And this year, don't be that dirtbag that only leaves rumpled sheets and a ring in your parents' bathtub. Cue the bells.
We gotta get Listen, where are you playing it at? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Normo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
the
big place, that side of town. That's a big place. You sold it out. I'll see.
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Innumerable cast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is December 1st, about 11 o'clock here in Colorado. And this is episode 209, I believe, of the Innumerable cast. A conversation with Natalie Afonina. Here, let me have her say it.
Natalia Petrovna Afonina.
Who is a Russian cosmonaut that also happens to climb. No, that's not true. She's actually an ice climber who grew up right here in the United States of America, but happens to have Russian parents and has spent much of her youth in Russia learning to be Russian, which I think is a vastly different mode of operation than being American, which we'll get a hint of in this podcast. Those of you who pay attention to Instagram may know her as Nat Exploring on Instagram, ice climbing and traveling and a bit of rock climbing in there as well, but primarily an ice climber. And Natalie actually pitched herself to me years ago. We talk a bit about this in the interview, but she sent an email, very interesting email, that actually revolved quite a bit around her dad and talking about him and his mountaineering career in the Soviet Union. And it was pretty compelling. And we tried to get this thing done in that Normacast way of, we'll see what happens. If you're coming through, give me a call. If I'm going to be around at some ice climbing festival, maybe you'll be there, that kind of thing. But it took a few years. And actually, this is a face-to-face one. She did stop by the house on the way through from Indian Creek to Denver to catch a flight to Mexico. So face-to-face one right here in the Enormocast studio, in the home studio, aka in this case my kitchen, where I frequently turn off the refrigerator and then forget to turn it back on and find things melting and spoiling a day later. She happened to be here when my significant other and the normal child was not here. So temporary bachelorhood just sends me back to those sort of forgetful things where my food is spoiling in a shut-off refrigerator. Of course, back in those days, my food spoiled in the refrigerator whether it was on or off. Just sat in there spoiling away as I shoved it out of the way to get more beer. And I wish I had something to tell you about, some Black Thursdays or Black Friday sale or a Cyber Monday sale or any of these other things that everybody around these things kind of does. I don't have anything. I just got this podcast. It's on sale, clearance, crazy prices, bottom of the barrel prices. It's all I'm sending out there right now. Over at theenormocast.com, the shop is down. Everything is messed up with that. I just, I couldn't keep up with it. And so I'm not selling anything. If you want some stickers, you can still bug me about that. I'm going to try to get the backlog out before Christmas. But yeah, there's no commerce going on at the Enormocast this Christmas season. Maybe that's refreshing to some of you. Certainly feels refreshing to me. If you're dying for a hat or a shirt, you can hit me up. I do have a few sitting here, and we can come up with a deal on the internet. Send me some money. Maybe I'll send it to you. Maybe I won't. Who knows? That kind of thing. And then you can, report me to the FCC or the SEC or whoever deals with that sort of stuff. Okay. Since there's nothing going on, let's get to the interview. Yeah, Natalie showed up, sat down. I've been watching her kind of mostly just on the gram, getting to know her on Instagram. But the person that turned up isn't exactly the spitting image of the person I think that is portrayed on the Instagram as that will work out. And we had a lot of fun talking. She actually came and spent the night, and we talked a lot the night before we even turned on the mics. And I got a little worried that maybe we'd, kind of gotten through it all beforehand. And sometimes that can actually make an interview a little bit sort of a retread of things we'd already talked about more spontaneously. But that did not happen. Natalie has a great story, adventurous person, and quite an impressive level of motivation and determination. So hope you guys enjoy this one. Fun talk with Natalie Afonina. No, Afonina. I always want to put an N in there. Afonina. Extra syllables too, I think. Afonina.
Well, girls and boys, the sun's coming up later and later and the darkness is upon us. But cowpokes like us know that when the going gets cold and dark, we still get going with a double shot and a dawn patrol. That's right, up before the rooster's pecking and the cows are mooing, and out the door for those perfect turns or perfect conditions. And though most of us aren't galloping into the office anymore with hands chalky and our ski pants swishing, doesn't mean that your dawn patrol humble brag isn't just as effective when you're 5 minutes late to that Zoom call. Sorry, folks, you casually say, I'm just not myself if I don't get up at 3 in the morning and go send some sick shit while y'all are sleeping. Black Diamond is here to support your morning mania with equipment for the dawn patrol. Headlamps to light up the pre-dawn hours, the perfect layering systems to peel as you heat up and the sun finally does come up. Ski gear for the punch-drunk 4 a.m. skiers, climbing gear for the unrested and off-route climbers, and even bouldering pads, because let's face it, you're gonna numb out and dry fire. So wake up, buckaroos, and though caffeine may seem like all you need, let Black Diamond supply all the gear you need to get up and get down on your next dawn patrol. Black Diamond is a proud sponsor of the Enormocast.
So say your name in Russian again, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's Natalia Petrovna Afonina.
And you, in Russian is your first language, is what you just told me.
It is.
And you learned English starting when you came here at 6?
No, when I started first grade.
Oh, first grade. So you left the household finally where everyone was speaking Russian.
Yeah. But I'd spend like 5 months a year in Russia, and then the rest of the time going to school in the States. So that's why you can't hear an accent.
Right. Oh, no accent.
I wish I can't do a Russian accent.
Really?
Yeah, I can speak fluent Russian, fluent English, but I can't do an English accent in Russian, and I can't do a Russian accent in English.
How does that serve you in your sort of everyday life, the Russian?
I get to blend in pretty well when I travel abroad. So It's also very easy to get into all of the Stan countries. So like Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. You can just walk in without a visa, which is really nice. Also, like the Venn diagram overlap of countries that the U.S. passport gets me into and the Russian passport gets me into is pretty spanning the whole globe.
Right.
Because usually, the countries that are buddies with Russia typically are not with the U.S.
Right, have a problem with U.S. visas and vice versa. Yeah,
like I was able to get into Yemen for a month on my Russian passport.
And you can't do that.
No. The American TSA like.
So what's your actual
me.
like citizenship?
Dual citizen. Although,
yeah, that's got to be handy.
As I discovered this morning, my American passport expires in 38 days, so I better get on that.
Yeah, you better be careful too. They might kick you out finally.
No.
It's a Russian asset. Are you a member of the NRA by any chance?
No, and I'm not a spy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but wouldn't a spy say they're not a spy?
All right. Well, my defense for that is neither country would trust me, and the Russians would have killed me by now, as just in case.
A little drop of plutonium in your coffee or whatever.
Probably with like an umbrella stick or something.
Yeah.
Probably an ice tool.
Yeah, but again, this is all, for plausible deniability at this point. So now you're again on record with the Enormocast as not a spy, just in case they're listening.
Exactly.
Not a spy for either side or both sides, whatever.
And not looking to be recruited. Just
well, it's
for
interesting
the record.
because there's actually literally cases where it's pretty evident that climbers were in fact spies. I can't remember. It's some Himalayan story. I think Pete Takeda wrote a story about it for Rock and Ice years ago about a guy that was like transporting like these beacons and stuff, and Thor maybe was his name, Thor or something. But anyway, but then within like just lore, I mean, I've had friends tell me like, yeah, we think he's a spy because he just like no one knows what he does.
Speaks weird languages.
He's hyper intellectual. This guy Shep Steiner actually, which a few Canmore area people just like perked up. All his friends were like, oh yeah, Shep's a spy, but he was actually a college professor, and so there you go. It's just like Dr. Hemlock from the Iger Sanction, college professor. Indiana Jones, not really a spy, but still like an alter ego college professor. So
I dropped out of my PhD, so I can't be a professor.
Oh, really? Yeah, you were done. So let's So anyway, back to the Russia thing. One of the ways in which we quote unquote met, and this might be embarrassing to you now because it was some years ago, but you sent me sort of a pitch about coming on the Enormocast. Which worked, actually. It's just that we hadn't. This is the first time we've kind of gotten it done. We've talked about it for a few years, literally, like off and on. So, but the pitch had to do with your dad, actually,
and getting someone's number. But yeah,
but like this idea that you grew up with this like hardcore Russian mountaineering and maybe spy dad.
He's a scientist.
Okay.
Yeah. He's just for an image, he's a stoic Russian Soviet scientist who's missing the chunk of his nose because he froze it off for frostbite. Very intense personality. He's 63 and can still has an 8-pack, swims every single morning at like 6 a.m. He drives to the Pacific Ocean in Seattle, even in the dead of winter, swims for 15 minutes. Drinks a cup of coffee, comes back, and goes to work. I'll never be as badass as him.
Yeah, and that was kind of like your pitch. Like, yeah, this guy is like my genes, but I'll never live up to like his stoicism and his his just general toughnn's.
Just the suffering.
Is that like a thing? The whole cold water, like it seems like that's like a
cold water immersion. I mean, now it's like all the hype, but I think.
I mean, isn't it part of like all those northern countries, like health regimen is to shock your body with some cold water?
Well, it feels good.
On a day.
Yeah, like when I was a kid, I remember this. I was like 4 years old. My mom would put me in the bathtub instead of a shower. You take a bucket, and she would just like pour a bucket of cold water over my head in the mornings.
And yet you seem like a relatively well-adjusted, cheerful person. It seems like that might crush somebody, or even be,
I think it breeds.
bring services to the house. So what has been going on with your kid?
I mean, kids are very resilient,
Right.
and I think the more different situations they expose them to, they
Right.
bounce back.
Right.
Like there's this great book called Anti-Fragile. It's basically like a systems book about everything, and you can apply it to anything. Of if you keep something kind of sheltered and try to protect everything and snowplow all the obstacles out of the way, the kid's not going to be resilient. Like, yeah, you might within a very stable societal place get them like higher up, but the kid, like if anything changes, the kid's fucked.
Right.
I don't know. That's how I think about parenting. I don't have kids, but
Right.
it's how my little sister gets the brunt of it.
All right. Oh, so you have a sister.
I do. She's 10 years younger than me.
Okay. And so is that your only other sibling?
That
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the oldest.
And what do you think? How is she, did she grow up as Russian as you did, or was it more kind of mellowed out by then?
No, very much more mellowed out and like kept close to home. My parents would send me to Russia for 5 months a year. Just put me on a plane, sometimes with a stranger as like a 6-year-old. And then my, great aunts and uncles would pick me up, and then we'd go live it up in some farms in southern Russia. Just like a whole gaggle of kids. We'd get up to no good, and climb fences and steal peaches and almost drown in rivers. And
that sounds amazing, actually.
it was it was like very Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn kind of like summers. It was great.
And was that like was it to keep your connection to that place? So was that on your parents' mind, or just get rid of you, or?
Childcare is way cheaper
Right.
when all you need to do is put them on a plane.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, because we were living in Seattle, and my parents are both molecular biologists and scientists and doing that full time. And so,
we do have to spend some time on this because it wasn't your pitch, but we'll get to you as your own individual person soon enough. But if your dad's 63, you said, then we're talking about probably coming over here still at the end of the Cold War. Was he like a classic sort of defector kind of thing, or was it all on the up and up in terms of like
moved in the 90s when the wall came down.
Okay,
so you have all these brilliant scientists who, capitalism is supposed to be reigning free, but to set up a biotech ecosystem of private sector instead of just having the government pay for basic R&D takes a lot of time. And so you have all these, PhD scientists
in Russia. Yeah.
And so there was a big brain drain in the 90s.
Okay.
Where American companies just like handpicked people and were like, come over here to the promised land.
Yeah. So in my head, he was pushed him up past the end of it. It would have been more the 80s and late 70s that it would have been he would have had to actually like come over here and then, disappear into a taxi and like the Russian athletes used to do and stuff.
Yeah. But there's some crazy stories about how they would meet, Americans and Europeans on glaciers in the Innumerable, like down in the Pamir Range, like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan. And so the Russians, everyone knows this, but the physicists worked for the space program, and they would just like pilfer titanium, make all this titanium and metal, and they made all their own gear, like all their own sleeping bags, their own tents, etc. But something that was really hard to make were boots and ropes. So that's the primary currency of what they would trade their pitons and titanium shit and screws was for ropes and boots.
Yeah, that's funny because I mean, having started climbing in the late 80s and early 90s, it was still like there was, this titanium, like Russian or at least Soviet bloc, Eastern European, like titanium stuff all over. And the joke was always that like it was semi-radioactive because it was like from a decommissioned like missile or something like that, I
mean, they're not wrong. Like my dad was like, the
ice screws, I remember,
and the ice screws were really good. And he's like, but the crampons were shit. Like he's like, they would bend. The metal was too soft, so he didn't want titanium crampons. That didn't work.
It's brittle too, so. I mean, depending on what's happened to it to get it to in that shape as well. So, but I remember like lots of titanium pitons. Ushpa, are they still around?
They are still around.
That's Czech though, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like maybe
they got morphed and I think like bought and
yeah.
So
the Ushpa stuff.
Now everyone climbs on Krukonogi picks from Russia.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, they're the ones that like are purple and kind of look a little bit like a rooster's top. Like they look ridiculous, but they're great for comps. like for mixed comps and stuff.
Why? Because they won't break.
I think they're one of the few
sharp,
specially designed picks for comps.
Oh, okay.
And the thing that blew my mind is I was at the Bozeman Ice Fest last year, and a couple of reps from the Russian team were there at the Ice Fest. And it was one of the first, I mean, these are world champ ice climbing comp competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them, I remember, it was like their third time on a waterfall ice. Were gripped climbing water ice 3 leading because it was the first time in their life they'd ever actually climbed water ice.
Right.
Because they just train specifically for competitions.
Right.
Versus in America, we're just like, like climb a bunch in the mountains and occasionally do comps, but they...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the same way with rock climbing up until the Olympics popped onto the radar. Like a lot of our comp climbers were like, comp climbing is this thing I do now, and then I climb outside for the rest of the year. And then they're meeting the Japanese and these people who are just pure comp climbers. And of course, for the most part, getting beaten up on the comp scene because of it. But, that's just like what's most important to you and what's not, I suppose. But the whole comp ice thing, like, is it something that you do? Have you ever competed in a comp? Not ice, it's actually just... What do you even call it? Because it's not even ice climbing, dry tooling.
Dry tooling.
Yeah.
I have not. I haven't really lived in an area where I could train because I'm always on the go, and I usually have a full-time job. And I was living in San Francisco, and you need a training facility,
right?
And nobody has the backyard to even set up like a little hangboard or anything. So
in a place like San Francisco,
a place like San Francisco,
the space for your hangboat's worth like
where everyone lives in a closet for
right?
$1,200 a month.
You can't convert your closet into a climbing wall if you live in it.
No.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Interestingly, that was like very early gym scene there in San Francisco, though, with Mission Cliffs.
Lived behind it for 9 months out of my minivan.
Right on.
Yeah.
Was it the same time when Libby Souter was living there?
I don't know. I kind of kept to myself. I tried to be like as incognito as possible.
Yeah.
And I'd, crawl out of my minivan, brush my teeth, bike to work.
Right.
Go have my, fancy
well, she lived
breakfast.
in some shack, I think, there. Maybe it was a different gym. I don't know. But same situation where she was just like trying to make ends meet in San Francisco. Sounds kind of miserable to me. Be plopped down in there.
That's why I moved.
Squashed into that place with everybody else.
Well, everyone talks about the great, amazing access. I'm like, no, the mountains are 4.5 hours away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I get more climbing in on 1 week of me visiting the valley on like a vacation than I do probably in like 4 months of living in the Bay doing that drive.
And it's also like that's, when there's not like the massive, you have to be in the weekend push into the mountains. It's the same living in the Front Range of Denver. Mm-hmm. Like Colorado's like, you can get right into the mountains. Like, maybe 20 years ago. But now it's like there's stop and go traffic out of Denver Friday night and Sunday night, coming back in or leaving and then coming back in. So that's why we live here on the Western Slope. So.
Well, it's also not really the kind of climbing that I enjoy the most.
Mm-hmm.
Like California just has way too good a weather.
Yeah.
I need something that trains me a little bit better. Like I need some rain, some sleet, some glaciers, like a little bit more objective hazard, long bushwhacks.
Right.
Which is why I'm in Seattle now.
Yeah, in Seattle. That's you just made to order kind of thing too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that access there is better. And like Salt Lake doesn't have that stuff, but that's truly another city where it's like, you can be in the mountains in 15 minutes, like for real, not just in the brochure kind of thing. So
yeah, the ice doesn't come in as much.
No, it's a different climate there too. So nevertheless, so let's go back to Dad real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you got your sort of ideals about the mountains is from him?
Yeah, so I grew up with stories.
What's his name, by the way?
Yevgeny,
perfect.
Yevgeny.
Yeah.
Good Russian
We'll post
name.
pictures. We can use those pictures you sent me, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll post pictures because the guy, he's quite a specimen, actually. If you think about like tough Russian mountaineers, like this dude would be in the encyclopedia of like, here's one.
It's great, like introducing friends where I tell them, okay, when you come in, look him in the eye, shake his hand firmly, and if he gives you a beer, take the beer. I don't care if you don't drink, you can dump it out in the flower pot. Like, it's very simple. But I grew up on stories of, so he climbed every 7,000 meter peak in the Soviet Union. So he's what they consider a snow leopard, and just would go off on these 2.5, 3-month long Sufferfest expeditions during the summers and then do science in the rest of his time. And he really talked about the camaraderie and like the group dynamics, and it's much more of the era of siege style mountaineering, where it's like, okay, they go out and they're going to go do, put up a new line on Victory Peak, like Peak Pobeda, which is where he froze his nose off, actually. I always was attracted by like polar explorers and like Jack London books and just Shackleton. And so this was kind of part of the awe, was like, wow, like those were real men and women. Those were real stories. That was like, that's life. And I never thought that I'd be able to do it. I grew up ballroom dancing competitively from when I was 4 until I was 16.
Really?
For 12 years. Did competitive Latin in ballroom. Oh, yeah. I can send you some photos.
Awesome.
There's
We'll
feathers
take 'em.
and rhinestones and like lots of makeup on like 12-year-old me and 4-inch heels. And so that's what I was doing. Didn't really enjoy it. And then I was reading up on a bunch about like the Himalayas, and he gave me these journals of these like Russian scientists that drifted in the Arctic and set up these drifting stations where they would like do science, and they'd just like freeze themselves into the ice for the winter. And for 6 months, they'd literally drift around the Arctic Circle and then get picked up. And then, polar bears would attack them. And then the ice sheet they chose would like splinter and they'd fall into the sea ice. And so anything like this just like totally captured my imagination. And so after high school, I went to college on the East Coast in New England, got a job working at the northernmost truck stop in Alaska, or in the world, I guess, on the ice road, and ended up taking a whole year off chasing adventure up there in the Brooks Range.
Okay, so slow down. So the ballroom dancing is kind of interesting. Was that like, where did that come from then?
That comes from classic like Soviet upbringing,
Right.
where as a 4-year-old I was enrolled in gymnastics, swim class, chess, drama, like all of the sports, figure skating, ballet. And they were all, somehow my mom in Seattle found all these like Russian coaches. They were never Americans. They were all Russian coaches. And they'd be very straight up. It's like, yeah, this 4-year-old has no aptitude for swimming. She just sinks.
Right.
No talent. And so out of all of the different disciplines, ballroom dancing was the one that I apparently, as
Right.
a 4-year-old, had the most aptitude for.
Right.
And so my mom was like, great, this is what she's going to focus on.
Right. Because you have to be like, you have to excel at something.
Exactly.
It's not like this whole
try this, try that.
and, oh, you're doing great all the time.
Yeah, no
Everybody loves-
participation
yeah.
points.
Right.
No,
That's
you're
so
going,
awesome,
you're going
actually.
for gold.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the pendulum right now is swinging back that direction in terms of parenting and stuff, of this idea of grit and I know it doesn't probably feel like it, but it's definitely starting to swing back from the participation grade era, which is, I think we're seeing the effects of in our society. But yeah, that's pretty wild. Like, and then you just like, I imagine it's something you had to do whether you liked it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I liked it at the beginning because it was just fun and I had friends, and then it became competitive and sponsorships got involved and
Ballroom dancing
championships. Oh
sponsorship.
yeah, the Japanese sponsor a bunch of ballroom dancers.
Really?
Yeah, it's a huge part of their culture. I don't know why, but I had like a Japanese sponsor.
I wonder
when
what the
was a
ballroom
kid.
dancing podcast world is like. There has to be some.
There has to be one.
Yeah.
Well, that's it.
To check it out. Or I could start the one. We could start one. You and I could start one.
Start the ballroom dancing. Yeah,
I mean, you could always fall back. I mean, they probably need commentators too.
that's true.
Yeah. So there's another career fallback for you into that. Because the reason I think of that is because my friend Lisa Hathaway was a former figure skater.
There you
Right.
go.
And then like as soon as like figure skating championships or the Olympics pop up, it's like all of her social media feed is just like arcane talk about figure skating and all these sorts of things. So it's pretty hilarious. But do you find it, you still have an interest in ballroom dancing?
Absolutely not.
Do you dance otherwise? Like, are you a dancer? Like if you're out and about and there's dancing, do you dance, or is it like out of your life? Or are you like one of those piano players who are so well trained they can't like improvise?
You are so right. Well, because my grandmother was a classical pianist in Russia, at the Conservatory of Music in Moscow. So guess who my piano teacher was when I was a kid? was my grandmother. And so piano and ballroom dancing were the two main things that I did growing up. And ballroom in Latin is very structured. Like I had a routine. Right. To this day, with my eyes closed, you can wake me up in the middle of the night, put on some music. I can identify what dance it is and do it for you. But improvisation, don't try this.
I wish you'd have told me that last night. I just said like, tap, tap, tap. Like,
put on some samba, see what happens.
But so the answer is no.
The answer is no. I have come around. So when I was 16, I remember I was in high school, and what I really, really wanted to do more than anything in the world was I really wanted to cross-country ski and race Nordic. I fell in love with it. My family always did it. And I love the snow. I love being outside. I love the endurance aspect of it. And that's all I want. Like for the last 4 years of me dancing, all I could think about was the fact that I wanted to ski. And so I finally quit, just cold turkey, just dropped my dance partner. And it's hard because like you don't want to let people down, and it's always till the next championship, like just let him find another partner, and so you don't want to let the community down. It's kind of a little bit like climbing in a way, like you have a climbing partner, a dance partner, and it's a partnership. But I quit, cut my hair, well, not quite as short as yours, but like pixie cut. Right. Refused to wear a dress or heels up until prom, I think. And then I swung a little bit more to like where I am now, which is much more like grew into my own shoes and like who I am, like my long hair and wear earrings and things. But definitely went one way and then swung back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because youth, in particular type of youth has always been, these things exist, whether it's gymnastics or this ballroom dancing, or it's, figure skating, or all these different things, particularly like thrust on girls in a weird way. And I've been talking about this for a while, but I fear that climbing actually, is in some places and for some people getting molded into that exact same thing of like, you will climb and the same lure, right? Like the kids have fun with it. They think it's like just, oh yeah, we get to go to the gym and be kids and goof around. And then all of a sudden it's morphed into this like high stress and intense training and competitions and everything else. And I think a lot of those kids wake up, and I know they do because I've talked to them even on the Normcast, where they wake up in a moment where they're just like, this is not for me anymore. This is like miserable. I'm miserable, and some come back to it, but
all of a sudden they're competing against their friends they grew up with.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, interesting that you just put your foot down and split. So where did
That's a personality trait. Like once I make a decision in my brain that something needs to change, like work, like I'm not happy, I'm not interested no longer. Within the next probably 2 months, I'm going to quit. It's really hard for me it's a blessing and a curse. It's really hard for me to do things I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. It's good because it's pretty easy to live my life the way I want to live my life with not a lot of regrets. It's like, yeah, if I want to be doing something, I make it happen and I change my circumstances to accommodate. But
you can put up with not having material things for a while you change streams or whatever. You're right now, you're not working for the first time in a long time, and we just talked about how it's like you have this skill set to just deal with either. Like I can work hard or I cannot, or I can live with nothing or I can have stuff, it's like, doesn't really matter which one.
And just being mindful about how you live your life. People see my life. They're like, oh, she van lifes and she travels a lot and she just climbs a lot and she, does the work thing. And it all seems very much like I'm just floating through the world, but it's actually very controlled because I'm a little bit of a control freak. And it was hard for me to just quit my job and not line up the next thing because that's the kind of person I am. But I was thinking, I was like, well, if I'm 65, how much money would I pay for, 6 months to a year of freedom and no responsibilities in the health and the body of a 29-year-old. Right. Priceless. I was like, priceless. And so as soon as that kind of thought idea came through my brain, I was like, yeah, that the decision is clear. Time to go.
Well, and you're, what do we call robotics engineer?
Yeah.
You code robots or are you actually like building
self-driving
components?
Cars? No, I manage teams. Okay. I manage teams of engineers that that build robots.
Right.
And so I used to code and do that myself, but I was a little too opinionated. So now I'm usually in a bunch of meetings, like stamping my fist, being like, no, this is not the right design spec.
Your little tiny fist.
Well, the great thing about being a woman in robotics is that my approach is a little bit more collaborative, and where a meeting can be super tense and like people will yell at each other. When I'm in the room, there's a little less yelling.
Oh,
like,
okay.
I don't think anyone will look at me and be like, I'm going to yell at this chick.
Right.
So I feel like I can get a lot done just by being rational, practical, and like meet people at their level. But that's what I do. I'm a total nerd. So like I work on autonomous systems. So self-driving cars is something I can talk about forever. The only material thing I really covet is a Cybertruck from Tesla.
Right.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be a rad like rig to live out of too?
Yeah. Wait a few years though.
I know.
So they get the kinks worked out, as you probably know.
Yeah. Yes. Oh yeah. I interned at Tesla a long time ago. It's an interesting company to work for.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I'm lukewarm on the sort of myth of Elon Musk, but
he's done a lot for I mean, I tell people like the only reason I work in the industry I work in is because I want a van that I will fall asleep at Indian Creek and I'll wake up, in Cody, Wyoming, and it drove me there by itself. Like I can't wait for that to happen because I hate driving on. Like I just drove from Tahoe to Indian Creek, and Nevada is just like I'm pretty sure I could just fall asleep for an hour because it's perfectly straight. You're going 80. And there's nothing. It's just like
a computer could easily do that.
A computer that I can tell you a computer is very good at.
Right.
Navigating stop signs in snow in Carbondale, Colorado.
Right. Yeah, maybe not. Yeah,
maybe
we're still
not.
working on that. But really what I wanted to just point out the fact that as an engineered mind person, as a management person, like what you said, you can't just like cast off your proclivities in terms of like planning and things like that.
My dad and I talk about this, like that life comes in stages. There's, he says like, you got a couple more years of wandering, but then, you should start thinking about settling down, Natalie. But yeah, there's like the life to explore and venture and be pretty selfish about your pursuits. And then you come to a point in your life when you realize that, people and relationships and family and friends is what actually matters. Like I used to travel by myself all the time.
Right.
Just book a one-way flight somewhere random like Dushanbe, Tajikistan, and just wander around for months. And now I really want to share those experiences with friends. Like, and yeah, life changes. The things that you want change. I'm really fortunate that I think this is part of the Soviet upbringing, is where in Russia, even if you're an oligarch or in the Soviet Union, like wealth can be taken away, material things can be taken away because things are so unstable that accumulating material things doesn't really work because it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. So the only thing you have are experiences and relationships. And so that's kind of how I grew up, is all of our vacations would be like, oh, we're going to go scuba diving, off the coast of British Columbia, and we're going to go do here, and we're going to go on backpacking trips, and we're going to go, my parents both learned how to skydive. And so it's very experience based and less material wealth based in terms of our values. I think that really helps me because I really, apart from the Cybertruck and maybe going to Mars, I really don't need that much. And it's a very freeing place to come to where I really do feel like I'm very fortunate to work in an industry where I can provide more than enough for what I need. And then after that, I can just focus on, well, when all your material needs are provided for, what do you want to be doing? And who do you want to be spending that time with?
Right. Well, when you going back to your youth, when you jump ship on the dancing, and it almost feels like you kind of joined Team Dad then. Yeah. When did that actually happen? In terms of like, because you've become this ice climber. That's kind of your main pursuit. You'll climb mountains, you climb rock, but it's generally about the ice climbing as being this focus. Like, tell me a little bit about the sort of transition to that, and like I said, sort of joining Team Dad on the suffering and the outdoors kind of vibe.
Well, there's definitely the tremendous amount of respect that I had for him, and also the kind of literary figures that I grew up with, where you really want to be part of that tribe and that crew, but part of me always felt like, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I don't have any of these skills. And And I remember we'd carpool to school, and I'd ask my dad about like climbing Rainier and like what systems do you use, et cetera. But the big turning point for me came, I always wanted to go to the Himalayas. And so I worked in Alaska, saved up money at this truck stop, and flew to Kathmandu, and just to backpack. I remember it was in January. I worked at I saved up money. I also worked at an oil rig camp in Alaska. That was an interesting experience.
Hold on.
Paid really well. City of 1,000 men in the dead Arctic winter.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When people ask me about like, so what's it like being a chick in the ice climbing world? I'm like, try working on an oil rig as a 19-year-old.
Holy shit. You truck stop, oil rig. I mean,
they're just looking for bodies.
Well,
like,
I mean, but
bodies that are not crazy.
You're in these, I mean, you're at Dartmouth or you were at,
yeah.
or they've got a big recruiting program there or what? Like, is there like a desk on the quad or there's somebody like, yeah, we got this job in a truck stop. We need somebody up in Alaska. Like,
so the thought process, I remember this.
We have to put a marker on this turning point you were getting into.
Yep.
But I just can't let these things just wander past the Enormocast without getting into them. So marker is your turning point, but the oil rig and the truck stop, just real quick, like what you were just like, I'm restless. I got to get out of here. Like all your friends at Dartmouth were, had summer jobs at the country club or whatever. You're like, I'm going to a truck stop in Alaska. Peace.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because my parents were great in that they said, you can go to any school that you want. We have no expectations. We have no idea how the American college system works. And you put more than enough pressure on yourself.
Right.
Like my parents never looked at my report card ever.
Right.
And
they're
so,
like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, and they after dancing was the only thing that I was ever kind of forced to do.
Right.
And then my mom always used to say, like, I've learned my lesson. I will never force you to do anything again. You are strong-willed. You'll figure it out.
Right.
And so I'm like, hey, I'm going to go get a job in Alaska because I didn't have any skills. So I Googled Alaska summer jobs. And one of the top picks was like Arctic seasonal work. And I applied with no qualifications except for like, well, I sometimes cook dinner, 3 times a week at my house. I know how to cook borscht. And they interviewed me and to Coldfoot, Alaska. They're like, sweet, we'll buy you a flight. We'll feed you. We'll clothe you, give you room and board, and you get paid.
Right.
I was like, wait, this is a much better deal, like flipping burgers up in Alaska in the Brooks in this town called Coldfoot compared to flipping burgers somewhere, in Seattle,
right.
Like McDonald's.
That's so funny. And the guy like hung up the phone like, we got one. Everybody's like, hey!
It's a crazy place. Like Coldfoot it's known for being the coldest place in the United States. It's gotten down to -80 where fuel actually freezes. It's a town of 28 people during the summer months.
Right.
And so I stayed through the summer, and Alaskan summers are fantastic. And there's grizzlies up in the Brooks Range are far north of Fairbanks, right? Like it's out there. I had there's sled dogs, there's miners, there's trappers, there's hunters. It's just like everything that you think about the West, you can find it there.
Right.
And then, it was time for me to go back to school, and they're like, we're looking for people to work at like these camps. And from a young age, I always wanted to go to Antarctica and experience like polar night.
Sure.
And see like mentally how, there's all the stories about like guys getting hacked by ice axes over a game of chess because they couldn't handle it. I was like, I wonder how I would do in eternal night. Mm-hmm. This sounds like an adventure. And so I just told my dean, I was like, hey, I'm not going to come back. I'm going to like take a year off. She's like, okay, sure. My parents too. I'm like, I'm going to stay up here in Alaska. And so they just gave me a job. Once again, no qualifications. I occasionally changed truck tires.
It's funny because your dad was probably like, my work here is done. I've raised a daughter who wants to spend a night in the Arctic. Well, perhaps she too will lose her nose.
Well, it's, kind of bringing it back to today. Like now we have a really good relationship with my dad. Where it's like very much we've found common ground and mutual respect. And I asked him the question of, hey, Dad, like you used to go on all these big expeditions. And he's like a very athletic, disciplined man, but he doesn't do, he'll run a Baker Rainier in a day because he doesn't think they're real mountains. They're like, volcanoes, not real mountains. I'm like, Dad, you can't say that. But he's like, well, for me, it was about the people. And, he was like 35 when he stopped climbing like those big expeditions. Like, well, a lot of people died. And also a lot of people started getting families and kind of, leaving the group, and the people that were left over, he's like, we were just kind of sad and we had other things going on. And now I just, they're beautiful mountains, but I'd much prefer to be with my friends and family down low. And I remember he said one phrase that really stuck with me, because I was sitting in the kitchen. You could tell I was a little sad and off, and because a friend had died. And my dad's a man of very few words, and not emotional, like classic Russian, not very emotional. But he said, well, it's one of the reasons I stopped is we went there to go up for the summits, but we came back with body bags. I was like, well, that's real.
Yeah.
Okay. But he understands where I come from, and he understands the risks that I take and the risks that I choose not to take. That the only thing my parents ever wish for me is for me to be happy. And to be content with my life. Like, you're your own worst enemy, Natalie. Like, so they never, they support me in everything that I do. They say, be safe.
Right. I mean, we're talking like type A.
Me?
Yeah.
No,
not at all. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because perceptive parents, can, I think, do get to a point, because I taught high school, and get to a point where they are like, whoa, like, we want you to succeed, because parents are supposed to do that. But like, we've got this person who's, and I saw kids even just here in little Carbondale, like, burn out, like 17-year-old. And especially, and I think I've said it on here before, but I was with Angie Payne actually in her interview, because she was very similar, that it's like it is definitely a bit of a girl thing in terms of high school time of a pressurized burnout. And so it's perceptive that your parents and your mom and stuff were like, okay, we don't need to pressure you because you've got plenty, so it's pretty interesting.
It was very much a take a step back, aim the cannon, and she'll take care of the rest.
Right. So the turning point, did we cover it? Did we actually roundabout? If we go back to that, you said... Oh,
no, we didn't.
Okay, cool.
So I'm in, it's, dark night, Alaska, Arctic, oil rig. And I'm like, well, what would I want to do with my year off? I'm like, well, Himalayas. I mean, I read, all of the alpinist books. And this is before I climbed, right? I've never roped up. I didn't even know what a figure 8 was. But I read all those like books of mountaineering books. Basically, like, we slogged, and then we ate food, and then our food ran out, and it was very cold, and we thought about food. Like, that's essentially how I see those old school mountaineering books. But I was like, I really want to go to the Himalayas, and if I can get to the Pamir Range, where my dad like told stories of how they'd go out, just getting to some of the places they had their expeditions was like they take the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and then they either like trek in for a couple weeks and then have some mules that drop them off somewhere like near the glacier, and then they keep going. And I remember him telling one story. He's like, yeah, there's this road in the Gorno-Badakhshansky region of Tajikistan where you're on this road, and on one side there's a river, and you're in Tajikistan, but across the river is Afghanistan. And he's like, and all I could see is like this tiny little trail on the other side, on the Afghani side. Like, here they had a nice road, like driving their Jeeps. And on the other side, there's just, some Afghani locals with a couple camels. And that, something about like that part of the world, like the Middle East, Central Asia, like Silk Road, just like utterly captured my imagination. I was like, okay, Himalayas, like people say you can just, I was Googling all this, like you can just go to Nepal. So I just went there, booked a flight, showed up, and trekked around by myself. On month 2, I was in the Kumbh region, trekking around, coming down from a pass, and I hadn't spoken English for a while, apart from like, 1 room, please, how much, potatoes, because I was getting pretty lonely at that point. And I'm coming down, and I remember there's this beautiful valley, like the Forsay Valley, and off to the right, I see ice falls and a bunch of ice climbers. And I didn't even know that it was called ice climbing. bunch of ice climbers, and right in the middle, there's this like big cauldron of ramen, like right in the middle of the trail. And there's this dude in a cowboy hat in a big puffy coat. And he's like, "Hi, do you want some ramen?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You're American." He's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Where are you from?" "Montana." I'm like, "Oh my God." And he asked, "Where are you staying tonight?" I'm like, "I don't know, next little tea house." And he's like, "Well, we rented out the whole guest house. You're more than welcome to stay with us." And I ended up spending 3 weeks with these guys. I'll kind of shortcut all of this, but turns out it was the North Face climbing team.
I was going to say, it was the guy serving ramen, Conrad Anker.
It was, but I had no idea.
Are you kidding? I just made that up.
No, I'm not kidding.
That's awesome.
Did the cowboy hat give it away?
No, I actually totally was making that up because I had an image of Conrad Anker's side job as a ramen salesman in Nepal. So I actually had no idea. I just totally pulled that out of my ass. So well done. Anyway, so yeah, Conrad Anker serving ramen in the middle of the trail.
And it was, I'm a backpacker. I've never climbed in my life. And I didn't know who these people were. Now I'm like, oh wow. I was in quite the crew, but they made me feel so incredibly welcome. Every evening they'd go out and climb, and they were teaching the locals. They explained their mission with the Kumbu climbing school.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
And there was a couple professors there from Montana State, chemical engineering professor. Because at this point, I decided I didn't want to study international relations and go be a diplomat. I decided I wanted to be a construction worker. Because in Alaska, I met a bunch of oil rig construction workers. I was like, I want to build shit and make stuff in the world. Like, yeah. I was going to drop out of college. I almost submitted my my letters of resignation essentially from Dartmouth. And these two engineering profs, I wish I remembered their names, but they're like, engineering is not just about math and physics. It's also about building things. And so they're kind of responsible for me not dropping out of college. Thank you. So one little anecdote. It was the first time that I really felt like I wasn't a weird kid, because I always felt like the outsider. In the ballroom dancing world, I wasn't really into the dancing. And at school, I was always kind of the awkward, nerdy kid. And here, they thought it was completely normal that I was walking around in the Kumbu by myself. They're like, yeah, rad, cool. I was like, and you're in that area and you've got I remember looking at Ama Dabam being like, I really want to climb that. And that's why I was like, I really want to get into mountaineering. And they're like, maybe you should try technical climbing. And you're going to school on the East Coast. There's actually great rock climbing and ice climbing. And I bet you have a climbing gym. When you go back to school, don't drop out. I bet you would really enjoy climbing. We exchanged books, and I was reading Girl of the Dragon Den 2 for the fourth time in a row. And I exchanged books with Conrad. And in his book, he had a little bookmark, a little black and white photo of some mountains. And I asked him about it. I was like, oh, here's your bookmark back. And he's like, oh, no, you can keep it. And on it, it's this black and white photo. Still have it. There's a little lightning bolt and a peace sign. He's like, the lightning bolt is how high I got last time. And this is my white whale. And here's the peace sign. And that's how high the Japanese team got, or something like that. And I completely forgot about this. And then, 4 years later, my friends, I'm in school. I'm climbing at this point. I started climbing in the Adirondacks and trad climbing and ice climbing. And friends are like, hey, there's a film showing. Do you want to go watch it? It's a rock climbing film. And I'm like, sure, yeah. We have free pizza. I'm like, done, sold.
Right.
Can get me with the pizza. And we sit down, and I'm like, oh, by this point, I'm like, oh, that's who Conrad is. And all these other folks are. And the film comes on, and there's Conrad holding this black and white photo. And I'm like, that's the photo. That's my bookmark. And the film is about Meru.
Right.
And so I met him, I think, the year before he climbed Meru successfully.
Oh, right on.
So that was kind of the full circle story.
And so you left this experience with the North Face people and the Kumbu climbing school
that I wandered into.
Right. That you wandered into, and then just it wasn't until 4 years later you sort of connected the dots of who all those people had been.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty wild.
There's a great photo.
That's maybe, right. You were on your way to finding climbing, again, because your dad, but that's a pretty wild, universe aligning moment. Pretty intense, actually. That's pretty wild.
Well, that was the first time that someone told me that to climb these bigger mountains, it would be nice to have some technical skills.
Right.
Versus before, I really saw it as like, well, when I moved back to Seattle, I like get into mountaineering and be a mountaineer
Right.
to go climb mountains. Like I'm a diplom. And I really had my sights set on these like high altitude peaks because like, yeah, that's where, men go to test their mettle, and women. And then I came away with it and I started doing more technical climbing, and I didn't know what bolts were for a year.
Right.
Like climbing in the Dax. That's also Eric Brooks. If you're listening to this, thank you so much for taking me under your wing. He's someone who was a senior at my college and taught me how to climb completely from scratch. I showed up with shoes and a harness, and he drugged me up like 5-10 cracks in the middle of November in New England, climbing on like tricams and stoppers from what I remember. And we all need that mentor. And so Eric was that person.
The other
for
thing
me.
I want to point out is the Dax just got mentioned. And so you Dax people can leave me alone for now. No, I get a lot of people like, you got to check out the Dax, man. You got to talk to these guys that climbing the Dax. No one knows about the Dax. And it's like, part of me is like, well, let's, careful what you wish for. Like, one of the reasons you like the Dax is because no one seems to know about the Dax. So let's, not promote it too much. So anyway, Adirondacks. Ding.
Ding.
Check. Yeah.
Check.
Yeah.
Great and people are like, how'd you get into ice climbing? Well, what else is there to do in New England in the winter? Like the rock gets cold. And then, and so my first time ice climbing, I was in Seattle for winter break,
mm-hmm.
and I somehow got my hands on a free pair of tools, and I hitchhiked out to Bozeman and just like showed up at the parking lot in Highlight. And some guys took me under their wing, and like, I was like, I can belay. I have a 6-pack. Can anybody want to take me ice climbing? And the rest was history.
Yeah.
So.
That's funny because it's exactly, I think, how Angela Van Weimer started ice climbing.
Hitching out to just showing up at a parking lot.
Well, yeah, in Uray. Like, literally, like, Yeah. And actually, I think it was Scott who was one of the guys that picked her up and said, yeah, we'll show you around,
Damn.
So it's kind of we joked about it on there, but I think it's a somewhat uniquely thing that a woman has probably had a lot easier job
and
doing.
Hitchhiking with ice tools and ropes on a giant backpack down the I-90 corridor. People are like, how do you hitchhike? I'm like, honestly, I get picked up by very concerned moms that like attempt to feed me and are very concerned and want me to call my parents and tell them I'm okay.
That part of it, the hitchhiking part of it, I think is definitely like, a hell of a lot scarier for a woman in a lot of ways, or a lot riskier. I mean, just statistically, it's a lot riskier. But then I was talking about the hitchhiking in the ice park or in the Highlight Canyon or whatever. That part of the hitchhiking is not too hard to do.
Not too hard.
But,
there are some benefits to being a girl.
Yeah, sometimes. So, I mean, if I was standing in the Uray, like with my, helmet on crooked and a pair of ice tools, like dudes would just be like, don't make eye contact with that guy. Like, don't look at him.
It's true. I owe a lot to the people that, took my Gumby ass under the belt.
Yeah, but I mean, to your credit, right? You still have to be, once the moment begins, it's like you can't be an idiot, and you have to know how to be a good partner even as a beginner, and you have to be. I mean, and you have sort of this go for it attitude that I think people, men and women you climb with, probably recognize from the beginning as being like, okay, well, this person is smart and she's ready to go. So we're not wasting our time here, so to speak. Yeah,
you got to be a good. There's an art to being a good follower partner.
Right.
If you can't climb the grade, you better be able to clean gear quickly and just get up there and at least not impede your partner.
Right. Bring snacks.
Yeah. Meat sticks and cheese and like Oreos and like rock climbing. You can get away with eating, I don't know, like a banana the entire day.
Right.
Ice climbing, I start the day off with like bacon and eggs and cheese. That's first breakfast. And then driving up, I'm eating second breakfast. And then throughout the whole day, I'm like drinking chocolate milk and like eating lots of food. Then you come back and eat pizza and beer. Yeah, I mean, it's a good life, right? Yeah. It's just the parts that are in between that are miserable. But it makes you feel so alive. You have a good day out in the mountains with your partners, and it's just like it's real. I think that's one of the big reasons that I love Nordic skiing and being out. I just love like mountainscapes under snow and like kind of those Arctic polar regions. There's something about it that just screams home. It's probably the Russian, you know?
Right.
And ice, like you get out there and it's like, it's you in the mountains and it's amazing.
Yeah. So you gravitated towards technical ice climbing.
I did.
You know, and have you yet to sort of make moves towards your, you know, Alma de Blam type dreams or anything like that?
So I realized that I'm not a summit bagger.
Right.
So my dad actually, he and I did Rainier together.
Okay.
Which was great. And, but I love the technical aspects of climbing. Slogging to get to the top, I'm like, the view is not going to get any better. Like, we're just getting further off the ground. The mountains are getting smaller. Like, do we really need to do the last like 400 feet to get to the top? Mm-hmm. And I'm much more motivated by the movement and just like moving through the mountains. And also, altitude sucks. And it just takes so much time.
Right.
And I realize like I enjoy some of the, you know, I'll call it the suffering aspects of climbing that come with technical climbing, but I enjoy it and I love it. Versus like pure kind of like slogging mountaineering. I'm kind of bored and everything kind of hurts, but I'm not enjoying myself. So I have this hypothesis that people separate themselves into uphill sport people and downhill sport people. So the downhill people are the ones that are like whitewater kayakers, downhill mountain bikers, skiers that huck off cliffs, where like stuff comes at you and you have to react really quickly. Mm-hmm. And I just don't enjoy that at all. Like that adrenaline feeling, even if I'm competent, like I've gotten pretty decent at mountain biking now. I hate going down. I'd much rather just carry my bike down. Like, or if there was a lift or a zip line to come down, more than happy to take it. Same thing with backcountry skiing. Like, don't like no fall zones. I don't like going fast. Like, I brake because I want to be going slower.
Right.
Someone gave me career advice in robotics, and they're like, well, choose a career where the dirty grunge work isn't that bad. You actually like kind of enjoy it. Right. Because every job, no matter how illustrious, has that. Like if you're a photographer, there's the editing process, right? And if you don't enjoy the editing process, you probably shouldn't be a photographer, or at least if you're not willing to deal with it. Same thing with ice climbing. I'm more than willing to go through the part, like, yeah, getting the approaches and the descents and the being cold and the screaming barfies and like the technical and the scared part. That I enjoy. But in mountaineering, the equivalent of like slogging, kicking steps, your head is just pounding, you can't sleep, you're vomiting. Like, I don't enjoy that. I kind of like set my heights to, I say like 6,000 meters is technical peaks up to there. One of the main reasons I moved to the Cascades was to expose myself more to terrain that would prepare me for slightly bigger ranges. So
the slightly bigger ranges is still in the mix.
Yeah. I've been to the Ruth Gorge once. Uh-huh. I was supposed to go this past April, but, you know, obviously it didn't happen. Like I said, I'm a control freak. I don't go like, yeah, I'm going to go to Pakistan and go set up some first ascents on my first trip to the Karakoram. Right. It's like, no. If I'm going to go, I'm going to go with a partner that I have an established relationship with. You go someplace, do a repeat route of something, mm-hmm. figure out where, what, how, and then you're setting yourself up for further success and like building on top of that, kind of like pyramid-like. Like people that find partners on Mountain Project to go do like the Cassine Ridge on Denali. I'm like,
does that happen?
Oh, I see it all the time.
Really?
Like people looking for expedition partners on different forums. And I'm like, who are these people? And why?
That's fraught. Okay. That's fraught with like disaster potential.
Agreed.
Right.
Yeah. But I have my, things that I feel like I'm gradually filling out my skills and like working my way up in a controlled fashion of, mm-hmm. I'd obviously like to do some things in the Alaska range and have my sights a little bit. I love, it comes with like the planning and engineering is I am pretty good at the expedition planning.
Right.
And like logistics and execution and planning. Like my backpack, I lay everything out. I will have my toothbrush like cut in half and only the, how many days of floss that I need. I won't bring the whole thing. And I bring these. Yeah.
Okay. So that actually, we you just talked about Mountain Project being, it's a weird thing to like get an expedition partner off of there, but you're no stranger to what I call climbing with the rando and using Mountain Project to find partners, because one thing we have to put in perspective is that up until recently, you've spent a big part of your career, and I'm, just your climbing career as a weekend warrior, as someone who had a real job with time off, but a normal, for the most part, go to work, come home kind of job during the week. And so it's super impressive, like what you've done as a weekend warrior. I think speaks to this like planning thing of like, you're not just wishy-washy on Thursday like I am about, who am I climbing with this week? And I don't know, figure out where we go to, like, and that's the thing is you need to be like that if you're going to accomplish stuff on a weekend thing. So, but, the partner thing is interesting because what you just said, I'm like, man, that could drive people fucking nuts. So you have to find the right partners. And we always look at it from our perspective of like, I have to find the right person that's not psychotic or not whatever. And it's hard to turn the mirror and be like, well, that person has to think about me in the same way, And so
there's an art form. Yeah,
there is, an art form to partner finding, but also like reading people. I mean, let me say this before we get into sort of reading people, because this is a fascinating thing we talked about a bit last night that I have never done because, I have this cadre of climbing partners now, and they're pretty much the people I stick with. And
you live in one place.
Well, and I came into climbing in a time when you didn't have this internet resource to do this. Like I joke that if you wanted to go to have a random partner in Moab, you would have had to literally walk around the streets or go to
the base of Scarface.
Yeah. Or go sit in the rock shop. At that time was the only sort of mini half climbing shop and like wait around, which people did. You did network through those things, but it was a way different thing. So talk about that. And when you are evaluating a partner, are you also thinking about yourself as much of like, well, can I integrate with this person? Because if you've got like the full on winging it by the seat of their pants person and you're there with your floss laid out, like, I mean, in a lot of ways, Jordan Cannon, who hung out in Rifle here this summer, is a little bit the lay out the floss thing, and I think he knows that can like drive people nuts. So anyway, partner choosing and this idea of climbing with randos.
Yeah, there's a couple elements. There's how do you I talked about kind of like the Venn diagram of especially like larger trips. You need people with the time, you need people with the money. They need to be people you're not going to murder, right? So you're compatible, and there needs to be a skills compatibility there. So that's kind of what you look for in a partner. The don't want to murder them is the key one. That's hard to assess. But there's keys to positioning yourself as a good partner and making sure that the people that respond to your posts are the people you want to respond to your posts. And then there's how do you evaluate someone once that you want to climb with. So evaluating it, this is what I do is if there's someone posting a mountain project, I'll like look at their sentence structure, like can they string two words together? I'm a little bit of a capitalization Nazi, like if, like every sentence begins with a lowercase and you got I's and you use you instead of Y-O-U, you're probably not going to like me too much. And then I click into the profile and, like some people like love Mount Prush and do all their ticks. And so you can kind of see like, oh, this person wants to climb the rostrum, but they said like, oh, 5'8", proud weed, or 5'9", hung twice, need to come back and project it. Like probably they're positioning themselves a little differently than what their actual skill set is.
Right.
And then if they use their name, then you can go on like a full internet stalking of them. And then on Facebook forums, it's easier because if you have any mutual friends, I do the backdoor reference and be like, hey, Caloose, what do you think of this like Jordan guy?
Right.
Is he any good? Like what, and people, and I'll say like, I'll keep it between us.
You're like, how long of a piece of floss does he bring? Is it like excessively long or is it just the right size?
Well, people can get along. So I did a last minute.
I've never heard of that, by the way. The preloaded floss pieces.
Just me.
I mean, with that said, like even as sort of, I think, lazy-ish that I kind of make myself seem, I actually have often been on expeditions where, not expeditions like we're talking about, but big trips where I am that person. That's like
flossing.
No, it just, yeah, like, but mentally, if you will, I need some level of structure, and I've definitely butted heads with people who are not like are totally winging it, you know, and the winging it, especially in a foreign country, gets under my skin, and I certainly get under their skin because I'm insisting that we have some reservations and some like we talk to some people ahead of time and make sure we can get out of where we're going in and all those sorts of things. Because that whole thing, like, it's like, we'll figure it out. I'm like, no, I think maybe we should just like figure it out now. So in 2 weeks, we, you know, the truck shows up when we are out of food and we have to get out, you know, kind of thing. So, but so I'm joking with you about the floss, but I'm also sympathetic.
Yeah. For me, I think I'm pretty laid back in terms of, it depends on the objective.
We always think we're laid back.
For example, I went to the Canadian Rockies and got to climb a route called Polar Circus with a partner that I'd met 48 hours beforehand. And for a route like that has been, I mean, I had Polar Circus on there on my little tick list, and I don't really do tick list, but it's just such a beautiful, beautiful line. And for me, I was like excited. It was going to be challenging, but like the right kind of challenging, but I wanted to set myself up for success. Like you don't want to be up there and then, you know, 2 pitches from the top have to bail because, you know, you're faffing around a little bit too much, didn't bring enough like tea or something, or didn't time it quite right. Like, no, if I'm actually want to get an objective done and it's like either close to a limit or there's objective hazards or there's a time constraint, I'm going to like control as many factors as I can and as many variables. If I'm just like rolling up to the valley to like go climbing, you know, I don't care if you bring like your giant non-ultralight cams and bring like fuzzy bunny slippers or, you know, a whole like 12 pack or something. It's whatever. So it needs to be commensurate with the objective. You
climbed Polar Circus with a rando?
Yeah. Great, fantastic climbing partner.
Okay, cool. But still, it's just such a roll of the dice. Come on.
I know.
I mean, is that still a big deal?
His milk truck was very beautifully built out.
The milk truck guy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, but is that like still a considered sort of a gnarly objective, or has it been pedestrianized like a lot of things that used to be sort of super sick? Because in my mind, I mean, that's been a climb that's, you know, popped up years and years forever as like, this is like this thing. But is it not a big deal anymore, or what? I mean, not to diminish what you did.
No, I don't think it's a big deal.
Okay. I mean, that's totally legit. And I'm so sure some people are like, well, wait a minute. I'm just saying, like, on a kind of a sense, like, you know, if you want to go back into my frickin' ice climbing career, the rigid designator in Vail was considered a test piece. And that thing is like as pedestrian as it gets now. So stuff changes. And yes, you personally can find it challenging still. So, I mean, it's not one of these
conditions.
Things
yeah. But no, I would say Polar Circus is very much a trade route.
Okay. That's a good way to put it. Is it a trade route?
Yeah, it's a beautiful trade route that is extremely aesthetic. And that speaks to the kind of climbing I enjoy doing is I'm not much of a cragger. Like we talked about this, like Joshua Tree just doesn't appeal to me that much. Or I love Bozeman Highway. I love you. But Cody, the Beartooth, like bigger, longer, is a bit more what I'm looking for. Like I dry tool. I've started dry tooling because there's not that much ice to climb, and the dry tooling really helps with the mixed, and the mixed really helps you get up higher to the good ice. But I really am. I don't enjoy like projecting dry tooling routes that are one pitch. Great training, but it's just not it doesn't have that sense of adventure for me.
Right.
But yeah, Polar Circus was met Matt. We drove out in the milk truck, woke up at 3 a.m. I remember posting about it because there was it was a really warm season, and there was a lot of avalanches in the area, and there's I think like a couple of deaths even that season. The thing with Polar Circus is objective hazard. It's not the climbing that's hard. There's an Abbey slope that you need to cross halfway through. Okay. It's a little spooky, and there's like this little tree that's I don't know. Definitely smaller than my forearm as I'm looking down right now. And my partner was like, okay, don't put me on belay, but tie yourself to the tree in case this goes, then like I won't take you out because that tree is definitely not going to hold us.
Right.
And then at the top, like above the last pitch, there's this big funnel that you have to watch out for Abby. Right. So our plan was very much like, okay, we get in, we watched it the day before, saw that the sun hit the upper slope, the upper Abbey slope around like 11:30 a.m. It's like, cool, we need to be off that slope by 11. So, and that was our turnaround point.
Right.
this is what I mean by like you set yourself up for success, right? Like you make it happen.
So like talking to you, it sounds like the draw has to do with atmosphere and quality versus difficulty. But are you someone that also is meanwhile pursuing your own kind of path towards like more difficult climbing? I mean, it's sort of integrated in the way everyone kind of climbs, but like how important is pushing yourself technically and in terms of difficulty?
So I see it, there's some extremely aesthetic, beautiful routes that I want to do that you want a margin of safety. So for example, Sea of Vapors is on the, on my list, up in the Rockies, and a couple routes in Alaska, and a couple things like in the Karashin Valley or in the Pamirs, like internationally, that I'd love to go do. But there, the more proficient you are technically, right, the safer you are. And so for me, it's less about like, I really want to push the grade, but I think of it as a pyramid. Like if I can go from comfortably leading Water Ice 5 to comfortably getting on 6s in like pretty much any condition, that means that any 5 route, whatever condition I find it in, is going to be that much safer, easier in my control, because I'm a control freak. That's probably, I hate falling. I'm a horrible sport climber. I will sit there on the wall and yell and meow like a cat, and my partners will be like, just let go. And I'll be like, no, it's fine. Just fall. No. And I'm like 1 foot above my bolt.
Right. Well, I mean, technology has changed a lot in ice climbing, but it's still in pure ice climbing, it's still a no falls ethic.
And mixed. Like, And
so I think aside from maybe you have this sort of global fear of falling that applies to all your disciplines, but to switch when ice climbing is your main thing, and you're switching into mix now, but up till this point, it's been just a lot of pure ice climbing. To switch into a mode of like, I can now fall, it's a big mental leap. If that's the one thing that you've been doing, not the other way around. And so you can criticize yourself for being afraid of falling, but it's also a survival skill in terms of ice climbing, because I mean, the screws are easier to place and they probably hold a little better than they used to, but it's still a freaking screw in ice.
Yeah.
And you're still got pointy shit strapped to you. So taking like true big leader falls is still just not in the game plan, even to this day, even in, 2020 versus like 1994 when I was ice climbing or whatever. It's the same.
Yeah. And I think it plays to my strengths where like, you just don't let go and you get it done.
Right.
There's no option to like, take. It's like, if you outtake, it's going to take your partner like 20 seconds to pull in the slack on the double ropes because he's standing out there like belaying outside of the fall zone and probably was like drinking some thermos cup of tea or something. Right. And you just don't do that. And I kind of like, no, this is the zone. These are the rules of engagement, and you know what they are when you go into them.
The other thing that's interesting, I think, and I've talked about this with sort of aid climbing, but a lot of other pursuits like kayaking and stuff, is that ice climbing is, if you leave the mixed, like the bolted mixed climbing out of the conversation, like ice climbing is still a game that in a lot of ways, if it's more difficult, if the grade is higher, it's also more dangerous. Not always, but way more so than rock climbing, because rock climbing is, in fact, a lot of times the opposite. Like 514s are always, there's literally like a handful of 514X routes in the world. Most of them are set up to be extremely safe.
Like I was just at Indian Creek for the first time ever. I was like, this is my like trad climbing nirvana, because I can just plug a cam and
you don't
the falls are clean and I can try. I was like, wow, I can actually climb pretty hard when I'm not afraid to fall because the falls are clean.
And they're virtually, the truly like run out routes in Indian Creek are, the short list is super short. And you can just avoid them. And there's thousands of routes that are, safer than any granite or most granite trad climbs, because you don't even have to cross over to another crack very often and stuff. But yeah, so back to the ice climbing and your idea of this whole pyramid setup. That is a tradition, I think, in ice climbing that's been there since the beginning. It used to be in rock climbing as well, but then sport climbing in particular, but then in the gyms in particular have made that fall away to where someone can, their first day out, if they want to try a 512, they may not get off the ground, but they can try it. But it's not like you can just, get on lead and try a Water Ice 6 or whatever F it goes to. You can, but you're going to it's going to be, trouble.
Well, the thing I like, there's certain things that I really love about ice is like it's so technical, and using your feet. Like my buddy Aaron that I climb with in Cody a lot has been instrumental in like be like, Natalie, remember the feet, and like you can be on a straight Water Ice 5 pillar. There's always feet. You can either kick, like there's ways to make it safer to climb, more comfortable to climb, and like you don't have to be gripped the whole time. It's like all about, control and like reading the ice.
Yes, you do have to be gripped all the time, because what if the ice breaks? I'm just joking.
You're holding on to jugs.
No, but the thing is that's the thing. I was thinking like that's what we make rock climbers make fun of it.
Yeah.
We're like, jugs and feet anywhere you want. Like how hard could it be?
Oh, at least it's frozen unlike like alpine rock where it's just choss and just rock falling everywhere. But you asked about like, oh, are you trying to push your grade? And I think of it less as pushing my grade and more filling in all of the different skill sets that I need to go climb. Like I love the Alaska range and some of the routes or the Canadian Rockies, some of like the larger mountains there. It's like, what do you need? Like you probably need some aid skills. Like no offense, I don't really like aid climbing. Like I'll do it.
Why are you saying no offense to me? Are you talking to listeners? Because I don't care. Have you not seen the aid rant?
I have seen the aid rant, but I just, even like C2+, I find it to be a little scary and just like, why do I have all this shit with me? And like, why am I even doing this? But it's really good practice, right? You need to know about like short fixing and like aiding and like, there is an art form and building up the skill set and just the experience base so that you can get yourself out of like shitty fucked up situations. Like knowing how to place like finicky gear on weed mixed when your hands are cold and you're wearing these giant gloves and you can barely clip. If you practice that, in sunny Yosemite, like it's going to make it easier. Same thing with like the Cascades. I've probably the only place so far that I've climbed where the approach is 7,000 feet of bushwhacking. And then you get to do 3 pitches of rock and then come down probably in the rain. But that level of like navigation and how do you read topo maps and just get yourself like in the fog and shitty climates and et cetera. It's like you can push the grade. Like I definitely am getting into like harder mixed and training for that, and actually like getting myself to train on dry tool routes and getting comfortable holding certain positions and such. But it's all more in a pursuit of filling in the skills gaps that you need for being safe in the mountains.
Right. How are you with risk and it's easy to blithely talk about how, if I just have it all under control, it's totally safe. But we also know that it's not totally safe. And ice climbing in particular, because of objective dangers. And also, again, pushing the level, you get into thin things that crack and break off. And, it's just part of the game at the high level of the sport.
I used to be like, I'm just an ice climber. In the last couple of years, the kind of routes that I love I love multi-pitch things. And so mixed, now that I've become a lot more comfortable on that type of terrain, just has opened up so much climbing where I now prefer something that has a little bit of technical mixed and then like some ice and then it's like some snow slopes and then we get up and then we, 2,000 feet later, we're hitting the rim somewhere in like Cody and you just like look out and then you have to get down. And that's like a full mountain adventure. And that's like what I really enjoy. And I feel like I've built up the skills to be pretty competent in that type of terrain. I remember I was standing in my kitchen in San Francisco, looking at some routes with pretty significant like Serac objective hazard, and I couldn't get them out of my brain. And I was like, I remember thinking like, what is wrong with me that I want to climb these routes where you get to a point like I think. You start out climbing, you're like, oh my God, everything's scary. And then you get to this like happy place where you're completely ignorant and people tell you can, minimize all of the risk and it's totally safe. And like places like there are ice climbing areas that, like you can ice climb completely safely. But then you start realizing that to climb some of these more aesthetic, bigger routes, there's risk you can't mitigate. And so, and maybe that comes with experience, age, close calls, partners, or just like being familiar with other people's experiences and when people die and you kind of and then people close to you do, where they're no longer people that you can explain away like, oh, I would never do that. But you start seeing yourself as like, oh my God, she was also a scientist with a Russian background living in California and, foot slipped and she died. And so you start kind of seeing yourself like, oh shit, like, no, these are things that can happen to you. And like, really, for me, it's like not just intellectually understanding it, but really internalizing that. And that came to me, I think, about 3 to 4 years ago when a lot of people in my life passed away. And I realized like, oh, I'm not invincible. Like that invincibility feeling went away. And I'm really happy that I call it like, you need to survive your 20s, right?
Right.
And I'm almost out of my 20s, where you get to a point where I think you become very measured about and you mindful of the risk that you're accepting instead of being like, it's all going to be fine. It's like, no, okay, we are accepting a certain amount of risk. There, our Seracs or something could fall. And there's acceptable risk and unacceptable risk. And is it worth it? And sometimes it's worth it. And you need to live with yourself with that.
It's clearly like that we make that calculation of it being worth it. I mean, especially in the Alpine. Would you consider your threshold high, or are you probably normal? Are you a scaredy cat in terms of the community? Or
I think I'm normal to middle, where I'll a rock climber looks at what I do and thinks I'm crazy, but I'm like, no, are you kidding? Like, if you look at the people that I most admire in my sport, like the ones that are pushing the new lines, and like especially anybody that goes to the bigger, wider ranges and establishes anything new, I'm just like, holy shit, like that is real. Like those are the people that, I don't get starry-eyed about people in the community. It's like climbing's climbing. Everyone's human. Everyone, has to shit in a poop bag. Like, but there are people that I really admire because those are true artists. But the risk that they accept, I'm not going to go on a 7,000 meter face and establish a new route. That is above my personal risk threshold. And I probably wouldn't enjoy it.
And your misery threshold too.
And my misery threshold.
Yeah. Which is weird, because it's the same thing in a way, because you talked about being, wanting to be, before you tackle something that's, at your limit, you want to be prepared. I mean, people who go on these climbs and the misery becomes this giant distraction. It's like it becomes more dangerous. Like you have to be operating in a place where you're willing to, not just willing, but you're able to operate through that misery. And the misery can definitely become the thing that ruins the trip and puts you in danger, because the misery can mean that you're moving slower, or you're not willing to get up and get out of the tent fast enough in the morning and all these sorts of things. Because that's always the thing I think about, like, oh, I'm at 7,000 feet and I'm in my sleeping bag and I'm reasonably comfortable. And like suddenly the sun comes up and I got to pull my boots on. Like, fuck that. I'm never going to be that guy. I'm going to stay in bed, and it's like, you can't stay in bed at 7,000 feet because you have to go further. You have to get up and be to that slope before the sun hits it and shit. And I would be that guy where somebody would be out there stamping their feet on the ledge, and I'm still like in there like trying to frickin' keep my fingers warm or whatever. So I would be a risk because the misery would be too much for me.
Well, there's misery, but there's also the ability to deal with stressful situations or when shit hits the fan.
Right. And
I think that's I've been called a robot before in terms of my emotional responses, but I think that
by a boyfriend, maybe it sounds like. Anyway, continue on. Go ahead.
I compartmentalize pretty well.
Okay.
Like if something is happening, I can lay it away and very practically lay out what the next steps are, what are the plans, and execute. And I think that's one of my strong suits. It's one of the reasons I like expeditions, is where, like, I was just in the Arrogach this summer in the Brooks, and like we had to bushwhack for forever with heavy packs, and I had a couple partners that didn't lay out their floss and brought like a 12-pound tent and giant things of toothpaste and et cetera, and all of our climbing gear, and you're just like, you just got to go, and kind of we're a bit low on food. You just got to do it when things are, if your rope gets stuck and you're high on a wall, like what do you do? Like people that are irrational or start freaking out are people that I get very anxious climbing with.
Sure.
Those are not the climbing partner. I tend to go for like Spang, one of my former housemates, really good friend, is an amazing partner because cool as a cucumber under any situation. Mm-hmm. And she knows that we don't have the luxury or the option to freak out right now. We just need to get it done and get ourselves off the mountain or get ourselves up and down. But I think the most important part about climbing is, when people talk about risk and like, are you pushing your grade? It's like being extremely honest with yourself about why you're doing something and making sure you do it for yourself and no one else. because I'm one of those people, I'm achievement oriented. As I said, I'm very type A. I call them, by outward metrics of societal success, I tick the boxes in terms of colleges and achievements and merits and careers, et cetera. And one of the lessons that I learned from dancing, and then I ran cross country in high school and was innately talented with it, and was asked to run in college. And I remember going to preseason practice and coaches telling me what to do basically and what to eat, and like when I had free time. And I was like, no, not again. I don't want something that I love to do, which was just like running in the mountains or dancing or skiing, to be taken away by me by other people starting to dictate it. And I fall into that so easily because there's, achievements and goals, and you get patted on the back and be like, good job, girl. Like when you make it. And so with climbing, I was so adamant about like, no, this is mine. This is my thing. I'm not going to let other people take it away from me. It's probably one of the reasons that I haven't really delved into like comp climbing. I would like to do some comps in the future. I think it'd be really fun to actually train and see how strong I could get. But in climbing, it's like, okay, I'm going to do the routes that I want to do. I'm going to climb with the people that I want to climb with. And I'm going to take the risks that I feel comfortable with taking. And I'm not going to do it, for the social media post, or to be like, yeah, I sent this route, or like, yeah, I pushed my grade. Everything is terminal. We all have a terminal diagnosis. We're all going to die. One of the main things that I work in robotics on was simulation technology for self-driving cars. So basically, I watched real data coming in of crashes, simulated crashes, real world like car crashes and vehicular pedestrian crashes, bicycles. And you look at the statistics, like 30,000 people a year in the US die. Like the economic tolls, just like, yeah, any one of us could be hit by a drunk driver tomorrow. Any one of us could skid off the road. So make sure that you live a full mindful life. Try not to regret too much stuff. Just do it for yourself. Because if you do it for someone else, then you just become like sad and depressed. And then you have, come to Jesus moment later on in your life. You're like, what have I been doing? Living it for someone else. And just, that's what I mean by like realigning. Like if I feel like I should be doing something else and I feel it in my core, I'll change my life to make it happen.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Natalie for sitting down, stopping by. This is actually a pretty good halfway spot between Indian Creek and the Front Range and Denver, which is where she was headed. Unfortunately, the next day it turned into a pretty good early winter storm up in the Rockies, and I think it took her like 10 hours to get from here to Denver and catch her plane. But luckily, she had plenty of time because normally it's like three and a half. So she kind of got hosed. But I hope it was worth it, and I think it was for us. Quick note as we go out is that I am on the Nugget podcast. It just came out a couple days ago, and you guys should check it out. It's about me. I know you think I talk about myself a ton on here, and I probably do. But Steven over there at the Nugget wanted to focus on my climbing career, and there's a lot of stuff I probably never really heard about that we talk about on there. I also attempt to destroy my credibility completely in a couple spots, and we had a good time doing that. Steven over at the Nuggets, banging them out one a week, which is incredible, and he's doing a great job. And I really enjoyed hanging out with him a bit while he was here climbing in rifle and doing that podcast. So can't get enough Caloose. There's a bunch over there for you. Hate listen if you have to. Okay, folks, it is the holidays. The holiday cheer. Is it cheerful for everybody? Maybe not. It is the dark time. So don't forget to check your knot, but also reach out. Reach out to your friends. Check their knot remotely by giving them a call. Get them on the Zoom. Make sure everybody's cool. We'll talk again before the new year.